We are back with another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. I'm going to ask the listeners, what would you give up for a World Series? Go over some recent roster moves made by the Royals. And lastly, my favorite postseason moments from when the Royals were last in it. I'll talk about that all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
First things first, thank you for tuning into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can find these podcasts on wherever you download your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, and you can find us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener, still very easy to find us. Again, YouTube, podcasting platforms. You want to do Twitter. Going to try here in the coming weeks to get us on Instagram, get us on TikTok, so there really won't be a social media outlet that you cannot find the Locked On Royals page at. So we're going to try to build that up more and more as we progress through the off season. But if you're wondering who I am, well, I'm just a lifelong Royals fan. I work here now in Kansas City at Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got a morning show on ESPN Kansas City once a week. I got a night show on 810 Sports Radio. So I stay pretty busy talking all things sports, not just Royals. But when you come here, when you want to get Royals content, that's exactly what we're going to give you on the Locked On Podcast Network. And I thought today was going to be more of a fun episode. And we always have fun toward the end of the week, and especially now with one final series to go for the baseball season. We got the World Series beginning this weekend. It'll be the Rangers and the Diamondbacks. It got me, sparking up some ideas I wanted to do for the podcast. And not so much for me to inform you on something, more so to just get some more engagement here when commenting on YouTube, commenting on Twitter. Again, we're going to try to get on TikTok, going to try to get on Instagram, and you can give your thoughts from there. Maybe you're not a Twitter person, but what I wanted to do for today's episode was really take a look into the past and maybe from time to time, take a quick glimpse into the future on what could be. And I've always loved this question. I've always loved this thought of diehard fans. For some fans here in Kansas City, because that's exactly where I'm broadcasting from, but you don't have to be just from Kansas City or have any ties to Kansas City. You can be a Royals fan listening on the East Coast, on the West Coast, in the South. Doesn't really matter, or the North for that matter. But I would say, for a lot of diehard fans, my favorite question to ask, especially with the way things have gone over the last couple of years, what would you give up for the Royals to get back to the World Series? And I mean, as early as next year. Just a hypothetical here to have a little bit of fun. And if you want to say what you would give up, or if you want me to leave a question on YouTube, believe me, I'm going to do it after this podcast episode. And I'm sure we'll get a lot of engagement on Twitter as well. But I've always loved the question. What would you give up? And sometimes you get, the really graphic, I'd name my firstborn child after a Royals player. I'd name my firstborn child Royal, something like that. Cheesy stuff, funny stuff. But in all reality, I love to compare it to sports. Now, here in Kansas City, we've got 3 college teams that a lot of people follow. I mean, I'm not trying to rule out UMKC. I'm not trying to rule out, Washburn or Emporia State, Fort Hays State, teams like that. I'm not trying to rule those out. But where I work at, I would say the majority, the high percentage of people follow KU, K-State, and Missouri. And definitely here for football, everybody follows the Kansas City Chiefs. Have some soccer fans as well with Sporting KC. But I think the great question always ties in with the Chiefs. Because the Chiefs, of course, as we all know, are experiencing winning like we never really have before. You've never seen a football team in Kansas City have a reign of dominance as they've had. And as that reign of dominance has happened, we haven't seen the Royals be competitive at all. So there's always that debate of what would you give up? Because I love hearing input from fans going, well, I was there in 2014, 2015. It's much better than any postseason Chiefs game I've watched because it was my first time experiencing it before the Patrick Mahomes era. You saw the Chiefs in the postseason with Alex Smith. You saw them in the postseason with Damian Heward, with Trent Green. You go all the way back to the Joe Montana days. There were years that you got to experience it. If you were born post 1985, you didn't see anything until 2014. You never saw competitive teams. So I'm with that fan of going, when I experienced that, I've never experienced anything like that. I've never truly been to a sporting event again like that. And I've seen the Chiefs win a Super Bowl. I went to the University of Kansas. I saw Kansas win a national championship. I was actually there in attendance, but I will always say there is nothing to me that compared being there for 2014, 2015 for Royals baseball. So the question really becomes, if you are a diehard Chiefs fan, a diehard KU, Mizzou, K-State fan, doesn't really matter. It's what would you give up? If I approached a diehard Chiefs fan, but also maybe a diehard Royals fan as well, and said, okay, for the Royals to make the World Series next year, as early as next year, would you be willing to give up 5 years of not making an AFC Championship game in Kansas City? Because that's become the norm, right? That's become the norm in Kansas City. Patrick Mahomes, the floor, the bare minimum is losing in the AFC Championship game at home in overtime. That's the floor. So if that was presented to you, do you take it or do you not take it? If you are a K-State fan, okay, I'm sure that football right now is what you really care about. If the alternative was, hey, we can give you a Royals World Series next year, can't guarantee what the future holds, but just next year, that's kind of the fun hypothetical here. That would mean that K-State would not have a winning record in football for the next 5 years. Would you take it? And it kind of just goes to show you how desperate some fans are. Some fans I know, some really close friends I have, are like, I saw them win in 15. I'm good for a while. I'm not going to sacrifice my other sports. I'm not going to sacrifice K-State football, Missouri basketball or football, Kansas basketball. I'm not going to sacrifice any of that stuff. And it certainly is a reasonable thing to contemplate, I think. Because for me, I think just about give up anything to see this team back in the postseason. As crazy as that sounds, I think it's a lot more fun here in Kansas City when you have a baseball team that's that competitive. I mean, I'm envious. I'm looking on TikTok. I'm looking on Twitter, Instagram, all those places at what's happening in Arizona. What's happening. I loved what I saw. Baltimore all season long. I was jealous of that. I've been jealous. I've got a couple of Rangers friends. I'm jealous of what they're going through right now. And maybe it's because, and again, if you don't know me personally, you may just think that I'm diehard baseball and I don't care about any other sports. Oh, I have my diehard fandoms in other sports. But there's something about the Royals that have always drawn me to a different level of fandom. And maybe if you're listening, you share that same fandom. Like when the Royals made the postseason in 2014, you remember where you were, you remember every single game, the feeling you had in your stomach. And maybe you have that for the Chiefs. Maybe you have it more so with the Chiefs. But I know for me, maybe it's because my entire life, the Chiefs were not really that bad. I remember a couple of bad years in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That's as bad as it got. The majority of my life, I've seen the Royals lose a lot of baseball games. So to see that on a level of postseason baseball, getting to a World Series, I'm willing to give up a few things. Maybe it's because the Chiefs have won 2 Super Bowls and you would like to say, okay, I can go 5 years without another Super Bowl. I mean, remember New England, the long layoff they had between Super Bowls. And maybe if you're watching this podcast, you're going, this is a weird segment, right? We're not even talking truly baseball. It's just a hypothetical here. World Series is beginning, and I'm looking at Arizona and going, how quickly can the Royals get back to that point? Because I'm sure back in 2021, there weren't many Diamondbacks fans saying, hey, we're going to get to the World Series in 2 years. I'm sure no Diamondbacks fan was saying that. A lot of it is magic. A lot of it is luck. So for the Royals, I feel like if it's going to be 2 years down the road or as early as next year, a lot of luck, a lot of magic is going to happen. And for this hypothetical, that's the fun part about it. And if you want to give your input, it's completely open. You can respond on the YouTube page. You can respond to me on Twitter. Tell me what you would be willing to give up. I might have a couple Twitter polls tomorrow just to gauge the interest of fans because, believe me, just because I'm saying this doesn't mean I'm not a diehard Chiefs fan or a diehard college sports fan. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there are some lengths I would go for another Royals World Series, to witness that, to get back in the postseason. Maybe I'm in the minority. I'm fine being in the minority, but let me know what other sports team's success you would give up to see the Royals in the World Series as early as next year. It's a fun hypothetical. Of course, there's no true logic behind it. Just want to hear some of the opinions, more of an engagement segment than anything. But I'm going to have fun with this one. I hope you have fun with it as well. Respond on YouTube, respond on Twitter, and hopefully down the road, you'll be able to respond to it on Instagram and on TikTok as well. Okay, the next thing we're going to dive into is more actual baseball stuff, not just hypotheticals. The Royals made more roster moves today. What does that mean for the 40-man roster? Should we be concerned about any of those guys leaving? And really just my takeaways on it. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in Ibotta. Now, we know Thanksgiving is quickly approaching us, and maybe you'll be going back home. Maybe you'll be hosting a Thanksgiving event. Maybe you'll be hosting a Friendsgiving. Doesn't really matter. Well, Ibotta is where you need to put a lot of your focus on it. I've done it before. It's a fantastic way of handling things. And if you're just concerned, you're nervous about hosting people, going somewhere for Thanksgiving, Ibotta is what you need to check out. Now, starting November 1st, for the fourth year in a row, Ibotta is giving 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving feast. So here's what you need to do after the podcast. After listening today, go and download the Ibotta app and use code MLB to get 100% cash back on your Thanksgiving dinner starting November 1st. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and use code MLB. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store, and use code MLB. So who doesn't want cash back when getting all of those groceries for your Thanksgiving feast? I know that, for me personally, there's a lot of stuff to buy. Now, I'm not going to be hosting, but you're going to be bringing stuff. And if you want to get that cash back, Ibotta is what you need to go after. Go and download that app right after listening to the podcast today. Now, the Royals made some roster moves this morning, and we're going to see a flurry of those as we approach the end of the season. As soon as the World Series concludes here next week, the Royals will have more guys that are going to be removed from their 40-man roster, just impending free agents. You're going to have the pending guys that are Zach Greinke, Brad Keller. Those are the two guys that come to the top of my thoughts, at least at the beginning. I'm trying to think else. Or Matt Duffy is another guy who's going to be a pending free agent. I believe Matt Beatty as well. Although Matt Beatty was DFA'd, so I don't believe he is actually going to be on that list. But it's something to gauge is what I'm getting at here. And there were a couple moves made today. The likes of Bubba Thompson was claimed off waivers by the Cincinnati Reds. So a guy the Royals took a chance on middle of the season, had some speed, had some defensive abilities out there in center field, but never made it further than AAA Omaha with the Royals. And then Taylor Hearn cleared waivers and is now a free agent, can sign with anybody. So two guys, maybe you paid close attention to them. Taylor Hearn was acquired in the Nicky Lopez deal, so kind of a wash at that point. I don't think Atlanta got significantly better with Nicky Lopez, and the Royals certainly didn't get any better with Taylor Hearn in their bullpen. You lose Bubba Thompson, but I tweeted this out earlier today, and I think that Bubba Thompson would have had a chance if it wasn't for how Dairon Blanco ended the year. Because what Dairon Blanco gives you in Kansas City is a lot of speed, an above-average glove, and I would say from time to time a little bit of pop. He's a perfect fourth outfielder. He's under club control, and I almost wonder if Dairon Blanco blocked Bubba Thompson a little bit. Because I think the Royals picked him up with the intention of, hey, we wouldn't mind seeing him compete in spring training for a fourth outfield spot. But there's also roster spots you need to clear. There are guys you need to protect on the 40-man roster. There are guys you are going to add to your 40-man roster. Maybe if you want to be active in the Rule 5 draft, you got to clear up some space. And you don't just want to leave it to free agents. There's going to be a lot more moves coming for the Kansas City Royals. And these ones today didn't shock me. At one point in time, I thought Bubba Thompson would be a really good fit for Kansas City. He was once a high-ranking prospect in the Ranger system. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he was a top 100 prospect at one point. But I just don't think there was ever really a future in Kansas City. And maybe if he was claimed on waivers back in May, you would have seen Bubba Thompson at some point, but he's also somebody that I don't think could hit well enough to even be your fourth outfitter. That's what the Royals kind of have in Dairon Blanco. I mean, his WRC plus is above league average. He's got elite speed, and he's good defensively. I don't think I need to replace him with just a younger version and a guy that maybe is as fast, not as good defensively, and certainly isn't as good with the bat. That's kind of where I'm at on it. I mean, the Royals are going to keep Kyle Isbell. Kyle Isbell is going to be your center fielder in 2024. At least it appears that way. You're going to have MJ Melendez in left, and then you might have a revolving door in right field. Could be a free agent, could be a trade, could be Nelson Velasquez, could be Drew Waters. There's just no room for a guy like Bubba Thompson. Now for Taylor Hearn, the trade felt weird at the time. It almost felt like the Royals just wanted Nicky Lopez out of the clubhouse. I don't know Nicky personally. I've been down in the clubhouse before. I mean, throughout the course of 2023, I was probably down in the clubhouse, give or take 10 to 15 times, gathering audio, for interviews and stuff like that. But Nicky never seemed like a bad guy at all. In fact, I feel like a lot of the players seemed to like Nicky Lopez. So it felt like a weird trade because there was no serious value that the Royals were getting. Now, I made this comparison on Twitter, and maybe it was a little bit foolish to do so, but it just kind of felt like the Emmanuel Rivera, Luke Weaver trade the Royals made last year with Arizona. I mean, the Royals traded Emmanuel Rivera. He just didn't feel like he would ever hit well enough to be a mainstay at third, and his glove wasn't that good, and the Royals needed pitching. But the Royals bring in Luke Weaver. Luke Weaver was never good. At the end of the year, they cut ties, moved on. And Emmanuel Rivera was starting in Game 7 at third base for the Diamondbacks, though he's still a below-average third baseman, doesn't hit that well. I'm not too concerned about it. And Emmanuel Rivera blocked Maikel Garcia from third base and blocked a lot of people from third base. I don't think that Nicky Lopez was going to start next year. I think, if anything, the Royals were going to move on in the offseason, and they wanted to see if Taylor Hearn had anything left in the tank. And clearly, I think there was a little bit of something there, but not worth enough where you're going to keep him around until spring training. Because here's the thing. The Royals are going to rebuild their bullpen. And we've already kind of ironed out guys we think are going to stay. James MacArthur's got a pretty solidified spot. I would say Carlos Hernandez does. If he comes back healthy, I'd imagine John McMillan has the inside track. Colin Snyder, if Tread and Dylan Coleman, throw him in this conversation as well, they would have inside tracks, but there's 2 or 3 spots that could be added to the bullpen. Would you want to keep Taylor Hearn around and then not sign somebody or not pick up somebody in the Rule 5 draft? I mean, I'm on the other side of that. I think I'd be okay parting ways with Taylor Hearn. It's clear that nobody else wanted to place a waiver claim on him. He just has not had enough success at the big league level. I thought his frame was intriguing. When the Royals got him, I remembered Taylor Hearn in Texas, not so much in Atlanta. He was in Atlanta for like a day or two. But I remember him in Texas, and I thought, man, I mean, that frame could project to be a pretty good number 4, number 5 starter. I mean, he's tall, 6'6", 6'7", good life to the fastball. So the slider had a really good spin rate. There was a part of me that thought there's something there, like an Amir Garrett with more control. We just never really saw it in Kansas City. So I'm fine with moving on with that. Again, there's a lot of moves to be made down the road. There's a lot of different roster spots to open up. You're going to see stuff like this in the coming weeks. I would not be shocked if somebody like a John Heasley, a Jackson Kowar, a Josh Stallman, those guys could be, ones on their way out. You place on waivers. I mean, sometimes you got to keep up with it on the MLB transactions report. I didn't even know the Royals put Bubba Thompson on waivers or, the other day Tucker Davidson on waivers. It just happens that way. These moves can just happen over time. And after the World Series, the Royals are going to have a lot of spots to fill. That's a good thing. You need to add some guys to the 40-man roster. You need to leave some spots open for free agency for the Rule 5 draft. And the guys they moved on from, listen, at the end of the day, I don't think you need to be losing much sleep about it. And that's kind of the way it's going to be for about a month. Some of these minor moves, you're not even going to remember probably in a couple of years they were Royals. Some of us will. I know I will because I just have a weird part of my brain that compartmentalizes that, stashes it away, and I'll just randomly know that Taylor Hearn at one point in time was a Royal or Tucker Davidson was a one-time Royal. You'll just remember stuff like that. And Bubba Thompson, I think, had upside. But again, with the outfield, it doesn't have a lot of depth. but he would have had to have been better, or at least been seen as a better prospect than Tyrone Blanco. Blanco's older. He's 30 years old. But what he gave you, I mean, he was one of a few hitters in the lineup that had a WRC plus north of 100, north of league average. He was pretty valuable. I brought it up in a podcast about a couple weeks ago, kind of comparable to 2013 Gerard Dyson. I think you take that in a heartbeat. Good defense, good speed, and a little bit more pop than Gerard Dyson had. So I'd rather hang on to him, move on from guys that were going to be competing for that spot. Okay, the last thing I want to dive into today is some favorite postseason moments from what we saw in 2014, 2015. I'm going to open that up to the YouTube listeners again and Twitter again. If you've got some favorite postseason moments, let me know on the channel below or let me know on Twitter. You can direct message me. You can just respond to the tweet. Doesn't really matter. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. So postseason moments coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to one of the title sponsors today in Jase Medical. I know for a lot of us out there, it can be a scary world, whether you're in college, you're fresh out of college, you're no longer living in your hometown. You want to be sure that you're taken care of. You never want to have to worry about getting the right antibiotics. Can I get care? Can I afford care? Well, Jase Medical is going to have you covered. I know with Jase Medical, I don't really have to worry anymore. There's a lot I need to worry about in general of moving into a house. You want to make sure all your payments are squared away. Well, Jase Medical takes care of you in a variety of ways. And that's because modern medical care and treatment are important, but our global supply chains are fragile. Things like pandemics, natural disasters, and foreign travel may cut you off from the treatment you need. Jase Medical is your solution. Just fill out their online form, and one of Jase Medical's board-certified physicians will review it to determine whether medications are safe and appropriate. Then Jase will send your prescriptions to one of their partner pharmacies, where your order will be filled and mailed directly to your home. You can also send your physician a message for answers to treatment-related questions anytime. Everyone should be empowered to care for themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jase Medical offers the Jase case. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jase Medical Plus, an additional $20 off by using my code LOCKEDON at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASEmedical.com. The World Series is just about to begin. And at times it can make Royals fans a little bit nostalgic because you're so far removed at this point from having fun in October watching baseball. And all we're left with is being envious and being jealous of teams that are there. We're jealous of Arizona. We're jealous of Texas. We're jealous of Baltimore getting 101 wins in the number one seed. And we're jealous of Tampa being able to do a lot with a little. You could say, though, that, Tampa doesn't make it too far. It doesn't matter. They have fun baseball the entire season. So it makes you a bit nostalgic. And you'll see throughout the weekend, maybe it's me, maybe it's another Royals follower. There's a lot of great Royals accounts out there to follow, tweeting on this day 8 years ago, 9 years ago, 2014 and 15. These moments happen, and it kind of just takes your breath away from time to time. It's like, man, we got to witness that. And what I would do, that was why I did the first segment, what I would do to have that back, to have 4 to 5 months of enjoyable baseball, what I would do for that again. And I'll never forget those couple weeks the Royals had in 2014 and 15, what it did for my sports fandom, what it did to the city. It felt like it just was different. And it all goes back to that wild card game. And how fitting was it? We talk about storylines. Texas being starved for a World Series. I sometimes forget how long it had been since the Royals had had any success. We think Baltimore was an amazing story. The Diamondbacks are an amazing story. Those are amazing stories. I really didn't comprehend back then what the rest of the baseball world was thinking, going, this team that hadn't been to the postseason, not to the World Series, the postseason in nearly 30 years, was beating everybody in the playoffs. And it started on that night, September 30th, 2014, and we all remember it. I was there. I will never in my life experience a sporting event like that. There's nothing that will come close. I have already confirmed that. I have cemented that. And here's the reason. There could be a replica of that game the Royals have in my future. I hope there is. That'd be fun to attend and to witness all of that. But what I will say is it'll be the second time I've witnessed it. That's why I am so confident. I'm curious your guys' thoughts too. I'm so confident I'll never experience an event like that again, because there will never be that feeling of, for the first time, I'm watching my team in the postseason. And for a lot of people, it was just this chaotic pandemonium, if you will. Now, I was 15 when the wild card game happened, and I really can't say that I fully grasped how important that was, which is why number one, my favorite postseason moment is always going to be the wild card game, is always going to be Salvador Perez, where I was. I've got a video. I was looking straight down at the play. I was upper deck, maybe 20 rows from the top with my family, looking down, and I had the perfect view of Salvador Perez in that hit. The reason I think in that moment it's so special is because for a lot of us there, and more so people that were older than me, they fully grasped what had just happened. I mean, I saw grown men hugging and crying because that was so important to them, to this city. And to see that in person is always why it's going to be number one on my list. And I didn't go to a ton of the postseason games. I mean, I watched the majority of them at home just because it's a lot of money to go to a postseason game. But I still went to game one of the World Series against San Francisco the following year. I went to game two of the American League Championship Series. Didn't get a chance to go to the Houston game. But we all know that a little bit expensive. But it was still fun to be there, to experience that. It was something like you had never seen before. So one, I think a lot of you would agree, is Salvador Perez's wild card hit. Number two, I mean, it has to be the Alex Gordon hit in 2015 game one off Familia of the Mets, who hadn't blown a save in a couple of months, it felt like. I mean, the roar of the crowd in the moment, it gives you chills every single time. And we're going to see a repeat of that video on Twitter, I think, next week, because I think it was at the end of October. Yeah, because they went to New York, and that was right around Halloween time. Number three for me, it's the Inside the Parker by Alcides Escobar. I can't watch that video and not get goosebumps over my entire body, because we remember that in Game 7 of the World Series in 2014, Alex Gordon hits the gapper, gets by Gregor Blanco, the former Royal, and Juan Perez out there in left field bobbles it on the track, and you come 90 feet short of winning it. And then Game 1 of the 2015 World Series kicks off with an Inside the Park home run because Yoenis Cespedes kind of just sticks his glove out and knocks it all the way to the bullpen wall in left field. And then you have Michael Conforto chasing all the way down. I mean, the roar of the crowd in that moment is ridiculous. I mean, I'm just going off the top of my head here. I mean, I could do Moose's go-ahead home run in Anaheim in Game 1, Haas's go-ahead two-run shot in the 11th in Game 2. I could go Gordon's go-ahead home run in Baltimore in Game 1, I believe that was. The clinching outs. Moose throwing it to Haas with Holly on the mound against Baltimore in Game 4. You could go Wade Davis tight-roping out of it in Game 6 of the American League Championship Series against Toronto. All those moments really were incredible. I mean, Johnny Cueto, Game 5 against the Astros in 2015, retiring 18 in a row. I mean, just ace stuff. I mean, Yordano Ventura lighting up the radar gun in Game 2, I think that was, against the Angels in Anaheim, hitting 101, 102 with ease. I mean, I sometimes forget, too, Ventura was doing that as a 23-year-old. We don't want to talk about young pitchers in the Royals rotation. Ventura was younger than all of them and pitching on the biggest of stages. I mean, his Game 6 performance in 2014, to experience all of that is one that I think ties back into our first segment perfectly. What I would give to see that again. And when you kind of realize they're a long ways off, it hurts, but maybe it can keep you optimistic in the meantime. But I'm curious of your guys' thoughts. Now, what moment ranks 1 for you? What moment ranks 2 for you? 3, 4, 5, list as many as you want. That's what I wanted for today's podcast episode. I want to leave it up to you, the listener, you, the follower. Now, you got your own takes. What would you give up for a World Series? Your favorite postseason moments? Tell me where you were. Maybe you were at a bar. Maybe you were at the game. You were at your parents' house, a friend's house, girlfriend's house, boyfriend's house. Doesn't matter. Tell me in detail your favorite moments, what you would give up for another World Series. And maybe if you want to, you just want to keep it strictly baseball and the moves of 2023, let me know what you think about those transactions this morning for the 2023 offseason. Still plenty of moves to go, but I'm hoping you guys have a little bit of fun with this when this podcast posts in probably 30 or 40 minutes or so. But that is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And find this podcast wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and you can catch us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. But until tomorrow for our Mailbag Friday segment, you take it easy, Kansas City.